Hello and welcome back to my channel and to my Pier Paolo Pasolini retrospective. And today we're going to talk about Medea. Now, I like to think of this movie as Pasolini's kind of ta-da movie, his great sort of big screen spectacle, his adaptation of the classical play by Euripides, with Maria Callas, this great opera singer, this great diva at the centre of it all. And it's this great indulgence of Pasolini, all out on location in these exotic, far-flung locations, Cappadocia in Turkey, and then coming back to Pisa. He's got loads of weird, fantastical costumes. We're back in this world of Oedipus Rex, this kind of neverland of the ancient antique world, but with all sorts of different mixtures and, different kinds of music and costume all jumbled together so that we're almost in a kind of fantasy world. And that's kind of how I like to think about this film. It's almost like David Lean mixed with Lord of the Rings. I think if I was going to put my critic's hat on, I'd actually say that this film is a bit of a retreat for Pasolini. He's going back to that mythical world, that classical world of Oedipus Rex, but without those kind of modernist undertones that you saw in that film. You remember, he started off in the modern day with a modern day story, and he sort of paralleled that with the classical story. There's none of that in Medea. This is just a straightforward classical representation. And it's kind of an indulgent movie, really. It's a sort of intellectual and aesthetic retreat by Pasolini, I think. He's just indulging himself. It's like one of these kind of fun movies where a director sort of is like relaxes and shows off and has a bit of fun with it, at the top of their game. A bit like, Hitchcock in North by Northwest, Fritz Lang in Ministry of Fear, to a certain extent David Cronenberg in Existence. You're watching a director at the top of their game, at the top of their powers, just relaxing and showing off and having fun with it. I tend to agree, Jonathan Rosenbaum, the American critic, said that this film was a disappointment, and to a certain extent he's right. In a way, the movement forward that we've seen in Pasolini's career so far sort of stops here. He goes backward and he takes his foot off the pedal. But at the same time, apparently the Russian Georgian director Sergei Parajanov watched this film and said Pasolini is a god. And I kind of agree at the same time, because there's something so fantastic, exotic about this film. There's no other film I know of, right, where when you're watching it, you feel so plunged into an old, ancient, pre-modern, pre-industrial, magical world, a world of superstition and gods and ritual, and a completely different thinking to modern man. I don't think any other film has got me into that way of thinking at all. So I think that's the best way to look at it, almost as a kind of fantasy movie, right? Now, there's some odd approaches from Pasolini in this movie. I've gone on at length about how this is a wondrous fantasy movie, but it starts with a lecture, right? So we have this centaur, half man, half horse, right? And he's telling this boy that he's found the history of his background, right? This is Jason, who'll be Jason of the Golden Fleece. And Pasolini writes it almost deliberately. There's so much information, there's so many names, you can't possibly take it in. You're going like, what's going on? And it goes on, and then it becomes about a disquisition on the nature of seeing the holy or the spiritual in nature, and how we seem to see it, but it's also a fake. And this is something that we picked up again in the middle of the movie when Jason has a dream, and again he sees his centaur sort of, father figure. And again, he'll talk to him about this. So he sees his father is not really his father, but the person who's brought him up, as a centaur, like a mythical figure. Then as he gets older and wiser, he sees him as a man. And this will be the sort of running theme of the film, that we start to understand the world in terms of nature, in terms of rationality, but that powerful draw of superstition and myth and imagination is always there within us. And that's going to be incorporated in the figure of Medea herself, who for Jason and the ancient Greeks is a figure from an ancient old world. She's a sorceress. She has some kind of relationship to the land. So she represents this powerful idea of superstition that still grips, people's minds. So we start with this lecture, but as well as it being a lecture, it's also like we are plunged into this kind of prelapsarian haven. You remember at the start of Oedipus Rex, we go back to the world of Pasolini's childhood and that special bond when he's an infant with his mother in this beautiful, cool, calm world of his childhood, this little town that he remembers. There's a similar feel here where this boy is growing up on the banks of this river in this little hut, and the whole thing is caught in the afternoon light, and you've got the sunshine on burnt, on tan skin, and it's so beautiful. You feel like you're almost in a prelapsarian, pre-sin world. And then Jason goes out into the world of people and men and kings and warriors. And the next sequence after this rather odd lecture is an incredible sequence. It's a total indulgence by Pasolini because the play by Euripides, Medea, starts years after Jason has found the Golden Fleece and years after he and Medea have been together and they've been lovers, but now he's turned his affections to another woman, the daughter of the king of Corinth. But Pasolini ignores that and he just says, I want to tell the story of the Golden Fleece. So the first half of the movie is the story of, Jason going to Colchis, meeting Medea, they steal the Golden Fleece and get away. And it's almost wordless. There's hardly any dialogue. It's almost like a silent film. And all Pasolini wants to do is to plunge us into this strange, antic world. And the use of editing, the use of location in Cappadocia in Turkey, those wonderful homes and churches and shrines built into rocks that look like they've been sculpted by the wind into kind of chimney shapes. And there's hardly any dialogue, and you don't really know what's happening. They have this brutal ritual where they ritually kill this man, chop him up, and then they spread the blood of him on the flowers and the crops to make them more fertile. The editing, the costumes are extraordinary. The use of music, again, this sort of strange confluence of different, cultures. So there's Turkish-style music, Persian-style music, but there's also Japanese music. I have to be honest, at some points in this movie, I did get the giggles, right? Just like, Pasolini seems to be almost making fun of the classical tradition at the start of the film by having this lecture that goes on and on and on. He seems to be consciously trying to make us laugh in this film. I mean, some people might say it's unconscious laughter, but it's so ludicrous at points, this film, that I couldn't help giggling. He often has people playing harps and then singing, but it's obviously Japanese singing, and it just looks a bit silly. He also has Maria Callas. It's almost like the whole film is designed to humiliate Maria Callas and make her do silly things as often as possible. So at one point she has to throw herself on some flames. At another point she has to chop up her husband in this tiny cart. And she's clearly not got enough room to swing her axe. It's hilarious. I was getting the giggles all the way through. And I can't help feeling that there was some, Pasolini was deliberately pushing it a bit. Anyway. So we'd sort of dropped into this phantasmagoria, that's how it feels. The story of the Golden Fleece. And then we get into, halfway through the film by now, into Medea, the classical play proper, when, Jason abandons her. Here, Pasolini does something very strange, almost Nick Rogue-esque. He has Medea work out her plan of revenge in a kind of flash forward. So she works out that she's going to send some marriage gifts, some clothes to Jason's new bride. Now, in the play, these are poisoned. In the film, they appear to set her alight and she burns to death, and her and her father die. Then the film stops and replays, this time in reality, and the whole thing repeats itself. It's a rather curious idea that Pasolini has. And the same thing happens, that both the daughter and her father die, but in a different way. It's almost as though Pasolini is sort of looking at this idea of the superstitious person sees it in kind of mythical terms, the woman burning to death, but the reality is something different. But nevertheless, the powerful superstitious emotions and motives have made the same result happen. That power of superstition, of revenge, of the old ways, It's just a very curious way of doing it because it takes up quite a lot of the film. And then we cut to, the death of the kids, when she kills the kids, what Medea is famous for. This sequence is very strange. It's very beautiful and moving, right? So the two boys, they're getting ready for bed. And again, this bizarre thing that the boy who looks after them is playing a harp and clearly singing in Japanese. So it doesn't work with the dubbing at all. It looks very silly. Anyway, detracts from it a little bit. Just one thought, another thought I remember, another bit of the film that's extremely silly is when Crayon comes to deliver his ultimatum to Medea to tell her she's banished from his kingdom. And he's wearing this beautiful sort of peacock feather gown. But Pasolini has him deliberately walking down this very dangerous and very steep set of steps. And he's constantly watching his footing. It's really Monty Python-esque. Anyway, so going back to the killing of the kids. So she puts them to bed. She bathes them and puts them to bed and holds them before they go to sleep, very tenderly. So it's a very moving, very calm scene. And then once they're dead, we cut to the morning and she sets the palace alight and her and Jason have their final shouting match. And the final thing she says, "Nothing is possible now." End of the film. And so this kind of intellectual and aesthetic retreat of Pasolini's, going backwards to Oedipus Rex after the modernist experiments of Theorem and Pigsty, and aesthetically, getting rid of the modernist element, getting rid of any parallels with the modern day, just immersing ourselves in this antique world. And at the end he says, nothing is possible. It's like the cynicism and the darkness that we've seen coming through in Theorem and Pigsty ultimately leads just to a cry of despair. It's over. No more. So you can see how I feel that this film is a sort of almost a despairing dead end. It's like Pasolini's reached the end of his tether. I'd have to say it's the last in this box set from Criterion. I think apart from Love Meetings, the documentary, it's the weakest film of that run, of his early run. But I still love it to pieces. I still love just bathing in it and enjoying it. It's a film to indulge in. Perhaps not too much to think about or to admire, but to really sort of lavish in. It's beautiful. It's oniric and strange and silly and fun and epic. Thanks very much.